There are 10,000 plus bird species in the world, and sometimes those species look very similar to each other. Today I want to talk about two of those species, one being the house finch, a bird that's pretty well known across North America, and the other one being a Cassin's finch, which is a little bit less known, but they look very similar to each other. We're going to talk about what makes them different, the different ways to identify each bird. Let's dive in. We have these birds here side by side. I want you to be able to see them throughout this entire video, but let's start a little bit with the house finch. So what's different between the house finch and the Cassin's finch? House finches have a very bright red to orangish coloration. Don't forget there's also a yellow color variant out there as well. Most of their red is concentrated on their heads. Now both of these birds obviously have a little bit of a red coloration, at least the males do. We're gonna start with the males and then we'll get into the females in a minute. With the house finch, however, the red is much more patchy, so it's concentrated in different areas as opposed to the Cassin's finch, which is a lot more uniform. Now let's get over to the male Cassin's finch real quick. Like I mentioned, that red is a lot more uniform. It flows a lot better on the bird, and it's more of a raspberry pinkish red than a deep red like the house finch. It's also evenly distributed across its breast and a little bit brighter on the crown as well. In the field, this might be very difficult to distinguish, so you're gonna wanna look at several different factors and combine those together to make your final call on if this is a house finch or a Cassin's finch. Cassin's finches also have a peaked head compared to a house finch that has a much more smashed down, more flat head. Cassin's finches also show a little bit lighter of a crest than that house finch's very, very deep red crest. Bill shape is also very important in understanding these two birds. House finches have a much more, what I like to call smashed look to its bill. It's stubbier, it looks like it's curved down a little bit more than the Cassin's finch, while the Cassin's finch has a thinner bill that's a lot more triangle shape, and it actually juts out a lot further than the house finches. Now let's just dive in real quick on the female differences. Everything structurally will look exactly the same as the males, but the coloration and the plumage will be a lot different. For the female house finches, their streaking on their chest is going to look a lot messier, thicker, almost as if it's been blurred a little bit. It's going to look blurry and messy on their chest. With the Cassin's finch, however, they have very thin striping on their chests, and it's a lot more crisp. So again, house finch looks like it's in a little bit blurred, and the Cassin's finch streaking looks like it's in perfect focus. It's nice and uniform and streaked. Now let's break away from the idea a little bit and just talk about habitat and range. House finch are very common in urban and suburban areas, so they're much more likely to come to your feeders, as opposed to a Cassin's finch, which is a lot more likely to be in higher elevations. Cassin's finches like to be on top of mountains. Now, let me just say this real quick. There are exceptions to this. I have found house finches at high elevations, and I have found Cassin's finches at backyard feeders. It's not great to just say, oh, it's high elevation, this must be a Cassin's finch, or oh, it's a feeder, this must be a house finch. I have misidentified in one video back in the past a Cassin's finch as a house finch because it was at a backyard feeder. I didn't give it a second glance, and it turned out to be a female Cassin's finch. It's also important to note that Cassin's finches are in the West. So think New Mexico, Colorado, honestly halfway through Colorado, and to the left is where Cassin's finches reside. Now, this is interesting as well. They don't actually go up the California coast. There's actually purple finches on the California coast, so it's a little bit confusing, but it's important to know where the Cassin's finches are, because there's also the issue of, is this a Cassin's finch or a purple finch, although those two ranges don't cross over as much. And to make things more difficult, house finches are found across North America, especially across the United States. In the Midwest, they get a little bit less dense, but they're there as well. So it's important to note that house finches and Cassin's finches do overlap, especially in the West, and so it's important to identify them from each other. Now, maybe in a future video, I will be able to do a purple finch and a Cassin's finch. Those look even more similar to the house finch and the Cassin's finch, but hopefully this was helpful so far. Again, any one of these things isn't enough to identify these from each other, but a combination of these things could be helpful in identifying which bird is which. House finches are obviously much more approachable than Cassin's finches, just because they're around people a lot more. And again, house finches are more commonly seen at parks and at feeders, where humans are likely to be present. Cassin's finches are much more likely to be found in more natural settings, maybe a park that's up in the mountains away from a lot more people, obviously maybe on a hiking trail, for example. It's just important to note that when you're in these settings, to know which one is more likely. That could help you distinguish the two by using some of the ID features that I mentioned earlier. Lastly, house finch songs are much more warblier than Cassin's finches. Cassin's finches are much more musical and sweet sounding. They're also much faster than house finch songs. So think of it as a much more sped up and more musical sound than the house finch. And house finches like to rise and fall. Rise and fall. So those two things are also an important feature in identifying these two birds. Let me know in the comments below, do either of these birds give you issues in identification? Have you ever confused the two? And was this video helpful? Also, let me know in the comments below, which two similar birds should I do next? Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you all next time on Bright-Eyed Birding Learn.